Hello,
Hi.
and welcome to another edition of Storyworld Explorers. We're exploring the story world of Farbodies.
So Farbodies is a story world developed by podcast favorite Nick Jones and some new friends, Bo Paterson and Richard Durham. This is a quintessential Transmedia story world developed by Transmedia experts, and so it has a ton of lore and a ton of really cool stuff to dive into.
Yeah, the story world is centered around this like grimy, dark Deco city called Ghostward, which is kind of it reminds you of the Batman Gotham City from the animated series in the '90s, and it's kind of centered in this counterculture of hardcore and this like punk grunge bands, and it's like fight the man, fight authority, and it's filled with what was the term again?
Hopeful pessimism.
Hopeful pessimism.
Right. So the entire story world is there. There's the astral plane. There are things and hidden wars that are going on. But we focus in on 1996 with this hardcore music scene and all of the hidden occults and cults and factions that are fighting each other with basically doomsday coming. It's a fantastic, once again, story, lore-rich world. And we just scratched the surface. We didn't even get as far as we wanted to.
That's true.
The Novelle Urban Folkcore is coming out on July 14th. And it's a good one. So stick around, take a listen, take a watch, and enjoy. All right, we're back with another episode of Storyworld Explorers, here talking about Farbodies, and a familiar face on the podcast, Nick Jones, with some new faces that is working on this very, very extensive, very cool, very rich transmedia story world. We got Bo Paterson and Rich Durham joining us as well. Fellas, what we'll do is we'll just kind of go around. I don't know what circle, what square people are in. We'll start with Nick, and then we'll go to Richard, and then we'll go to Bo, and that's the way that we'll just make that declaration. So introduce yourselves. Let us know what you're working on or what your role is on the project, and then we'll dive on in.
Cool. I'm Nick. Some of your listeners might recognize my voice from a previous episode. I am a narrative designer and transmedia producer. I've been working in video games for around about 9-ish years now, developing story worlds, dialogue, characters, all of that good stuff. Farbodies is partly my creation. I owe some of the creative ideas to Rich and to Bo and some of our other team members. But my role on the project, I guess, is essentially creative director and narrative lead. So my focus is on developing the world and making sure that the themes and ideas in this world are reflected across the board, whether it's working with Rich, for example, on game design, or Bo with art. That's sort of my focus, is making sure that this awesome world that we've created is consistent across all areas. So that's me.
Excellent. Rich?
Yeah, kia ora. Rich Durham. I work as a games designer and an academic and educator, that kind of circle of things, making serious games for people. But most of the work I end up doing works in physical media, or audio, or that kind of thing. So it's like I work in very different IPs and media types. In this particular case, I'm working on the games, tabletop role-playing games. I'm working on the the video games. And a lot of it comes down to how our audience is going to be interacting with the IP, because the games adds that layer of what is the interaction that we have, how do we affect the story world, and how do we affect the medium itself to impact the kind of story we're getting out of it.
Great. Bo?
Kia ora, I'm Bo. So my background is in sort of visual art. So on this project, I'm responsible for doing well, all the art. So that includes the promotional material we've done so far, in-game assets, concept art, all that kind of stuff. Sort of responsible for setting the visual vibe.
Yeah. Great. It's a well fleshed out team. You know, most people when they're starting on some of these projects, Brett, they only have just them, and that's what's really nice about this setup that we have right now. We have different facets of the world that we're going to be able to explore after we get over just introducing the world of what's actually being worked on. So, Nick, we were talking about this world before it had a name. It probably had a name, but you didn't tell us the name, right? I mean, we've been like at least been dipping our toes in the Farbodies Storyworld since we've met you. When we're talking about an IP that's like this, people like the World Bible right now is like 120 something pages of just everything that you can think of from the stylistic choices, the narrative, the settings, and all of this stuff. It's so well thought out, and that's what's getting us really excited to talk about this and introduce this world to you. Don't worry, we're not going to overwhelm you because we know that can get kind of overwhelming. But we'll start with the city of Ghostward, where primarily the stories and the transmedia pieces are starting. Tell us a little bit about this city and dip your toe in the narrative pillars and kind of the whole setting, the feelings that you guys are going for with these stories, particularly at this point in time in the Storyworld history.
Awesome. Ghostward is our primary setting to our world. It is a grimy city marked by, urban decay, neon lights, constant rain. Think like the city in Blade Runner crossed with like Gotham City from Batman. That's the vibe that we're sort of going for. Ghostward is a city that I guess is defined by its diverse collection of cults, obscure religious sects, mystery religions, all of these kind of ancient occult groups and conspiracy groups are sort of proliferated across the city and sort of vying for control over our world. That would be probably a high level little explanation for you guys.
Great, yeah. So it's really, really cool the way that you guys describe the like I said, a Gotham City mixed with the Blade Runner, like very cool. Some of the artistic stuff, and actually I didn't even ask you this from the pre-podcast conversation, and that's my fault, but I'm hoping that we'll be able to show some images on the Storyworld Explorers YouTube page now during the video to kind of show like what we're talking about in these different pillars, because it looks really cool. It looks like you could really sink your teeth into it. When we're talking about the art style, we can go to Bo, of the like you said, this constant rain, the splatter punk, the neon lights, all of this really cool, inviting storytelling that is within the imagery there. Talk a little bit about like what we're dealing with, and specifically the dark deco, because I love the dark deco.
Yeah, so the dark deco is a sort of term that was popularized by Batman the Animated Series. And so what that means is that instead of sort of starting from like a white background and building up from there, you start really dark and then you bring in the light. So it's just an inherently really moody piece. Really effective, really hard to pull off though. And so when you mix the dark deco with the splatterpunk elements, the occult stuff, and really crucially the hardcore scene, you get this really interesting like combination of really cool themes. And I like to think of it as sort of like this Venn diagram where you've got the splatterpunk, you've got the dark deco, and you've got the hardcore, and right in the middle it's just cool as hell. Like that's the best way to describe it. Yeah.
No, it's very cool. It's very inviting. It's very it's just, it has this yeah, it has this feel, like you said, you just kind of alluded to it, the hardcore scene, which is kind of at the cornerstone of what's happening in Ghostward. And Nick, you kind of alluded to this a bit, of like these factions and these cults, and the city of Ghostward is on the surface like any other city, but you can tell that there are things happening all over the place, underneath the ground, above, like there's discontent brewing everywhere. And there's a lot of, propaganda, and there's a lot of mind numbingness parts of that culture of just like, you know what, this is just how it is. We're just kind of making it through, blah, blah, blah. But then the hardcore scene comes in and represents that punch to the gut, and something we'll probably talk about a little bit later, of the necessariness of art to break up that monotony and to make people wake up to the realities of what's actually happening just outside their doorstep, or stuff that they might be ignoring. So what is hardcore? First of all, is a music style, which I know you've explained this to me before, but just for everybody else. And then why is the hardcore scene? Why did you guys choose the hardcore scene to represent that that underground resistance feel for the story world?
So hardcore, as you mentioned, it's a style of music, a subgenre of music. Originally, it's sort of an offshoot of the punk style from the 70s and 80s. Hardcore is typically defined as being a bit, I think, a bit faster than punk,
Mm-hmm.
a bit more intense. There's a lot of sort of yelling and screaming vocals involved.
Sure.
Like punk, it's highly politicized. But I guess unlike punk, well, actually, let me rephrase that. Where punk often tends to kind of look at the world and the society that we live in and say like fuck it all, and sort of check out. Hardcore is a little bit more, I guess, motivated by social justice movements and these sorts of ideas of resisting and creating change in society. So for both myself and Bo, we both grew up in the hardcore scene
Sure.
locally here in New Zealand, and have sort of been around that throughout our teenage years and early adult years as well, up to the
Right.
present. Um, but I guess what if we were to sort of dig in a little bit deeper, what is fascinating and beautiful and complex about the hardcore scene is more the culture around it than the music necessarily. So
Right.
uh, these ideas of DIY, these ideas of making change in the world around you, and then just how people in this community interact with each other. It's very
Right.
family orientated, right? If you attend a show, you'll see some pretty like crazy sort of mosh pit stuff going on, that looks very violent, and like a big fight. But it's more about an expression of, in some cases, anger, in some cases, like just release.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there are kind of these unspoken rules in the scene of like someone falls over in the pit, you pick them up. We're all a
Right.
family. We're all here to look out for each other. So it's quite a beautiful subculture once you sort of get past that like
Sure.
uh, slightly scary exterior.
Right.
And so yeah, so I grew up in the scene, like I said, and it's been something that's been important to me for quite a few years. When we first started working on this project, the hardcore scene was kind of not even a consideration in the idea. Originally, we were perhaps ripping off some famous video game franchises like Assassin's Creed
Oh.
and games like that, Alan Wake. Um,
Sure. Sure.
but I guess for us, the change came when Rich and I actually sat down with a friend of his who is a self-published author, and we were sort of discussing the IP with them, and part of that discussion was talking about like merging things together, right? And like how do you like if you can take something that's really cool and stylish and then merge that with something that you personally love and know a lot about, then you kind of had this secret sauce thing.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
so
Sure.
from that conversation, we started thinking about, well, what is our secret sauce? And we already had elements of counterculture sort of starting to creep into the IP.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the point in which we went, okay, let's just like go all in on that,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
focus it around the hardcore scene as kind of like this uh, faction or resistance group within Ghostward, that are all about like standing up for the community and organizing them and protecting them and giving them the tools to protect themselves against these kinds of supernatural threats that are occurring in our world.
Mm. Yeah, quick shout out to that friend of mine, Robert V. Aldrich, who's also a brilliant Storyworld curator himself as well,
Right.
and speak on these things. We learned a lot from that conversation.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I was just gonna comment on like the dark deco and how that is kind of an art style, and yet when I'm reading
Novella.
the novella, it's clear that Ghostward is a city that gets under your nails. It's like you could the way the prose is working. It's the same. It's doing the same thing as that Batman animation where you could definitely it's like it's that same art style but within the words is coming through, and so like I can get like you could get dirty just walking out of your front door in Ghostward.
No worries in the shower.
Yeah.
You're right. It's like
It's raining outside anyways.
if
right?
you go out there, you're covered in soot and grime.
I mean, it's very interesting that you say that, Jack, because um, a lot of the kind of vibe and atmosphere to the world is something that I don't quite understand myself. Uh, I find that like it's this certain yeah, vibe is the only way I can describe it. It's the certain feeling that I get when writing in this world that feels nostalgic, like the Batman cartoons, but also
Yeah,
feels
yeah,
like gritty and weird. And it's the certain feeling that so when I sit down to write anything on this project, there
yeah.
is almost this kind of like transition period of like a few minutes as I kind of like shut my eyes and try to like conjure that feeling. Um,
Sure. Sure.
it's like something that I half remember,
Yeah.
but I don't
Right.
know
But you
if
come out
it's
of it and you're
It's
like,
kind yeah, it feels like
or what,
it,
but
right. It feels like you're kind of you get. It's like it's like as if you're getting like you put yourself in an alley in like mid July when it's just barely not raining, so it's like really kind of you're getting it's like a sticky feeling, but it's just kind of like a filth and but I get it's like from the first page you're like no one in this city is comfortable right now with like that opening scene with the guy is like he's chomping on his cigarette and they're looking at this body and they're like no one's comfortable, like their skin is crawling with this like and so
sure.
I feel it's like you're pulling the layers, you're adding just a little bit of light to the darkness, like you were saying was the concept behind the dark deco. So it's
yeah, yeah, and
you
this
guys are
feeds
all
into this also feeds into the I guess the philosophical worldview of the IP
Mm.
as well, which is this concept
Sure.
of hopeful pessimism. Um, I don't know if your listeners are familiar with that term,
Okay.
but
Okay.
a quick overview, I guess, of it. Hopeful pessimism is this idea that you can sort of have this almost negative view of the world, and sort of take in the reality of things, like how bad things might actually be, and accept that but still hope and still fight and resist and try for a better world, regardless of whether success is likely or not.
Right.
And so we talk about it as like the characters in our world are ultimately doomed, right?
Hmm.
Um,
Right. Right. Right.
the chances of their success is very, very slim. It's very cosmic horror. Um, but we wanted to bring hope into the mix because that is something that like I personally believe in. I have the words hope tattooed on my chest.
Well,
So
there you go.
we wanted to bring that in, and so the question was, what does hope look like in a world that's defined by cosmic horror?
Right.
And the answer to that was, well, characters rely on their chosen families, their friendships, their relationships. They celebrate the small things and
Hmm.
sort of party into the night when the world is about to end the next day.
Right. Right. Right.
And so for us, hopeful pessimism is kind of this key message that we're trying to get across, this idea that like, yeah, we may be facing in the real world, in our real lives, all of these horrible things happening around the world, and it's highly likely that things will just keep getting worse. But that doesn't mean that we just kind of give in to apathy and that we just stop
Right. Right. Right.
trying for a better world. It means that we fight because that's the right thing to do. That's the only like in my opinion, the only rational thing to do when confronted with these kinds of things, because that's how we hold on to our humanity, right? And that is kind of the message of this IP to our audiences.
Hmm.
Yeah. It just works so well with the hardcore scene too, and how perfect of a marriage that is. And then how a great frame of reference, even if you're not familiar with hardcore, like you can picture a mosh pit, and then you're like, where does that take place? And then you couple that with the Ghostward, the textures and the art style of Ghostward, and like, oh, I can really picture this, right? And I was going to mention, and if you didn't, the helping somebody up in the mosh pit, right? Of like that's what we're dealing with here. That's the type of community that's built with hardcore, and how well that matches so well with the resistance of and what is the only hope for
I think
the area.
I think I don't know if it is an expression, but helping someone up in a mosh pit sounds a lot like was it hopeful pessimism. It's like I'm helping you up in this thing where we're
in
just
the mosh pit, right?
We're gonna literally be pushed down again.
You're gonna fall back down, but
I'm gonna help you back up. So I think
Another note about the using hardcore punk as this kind of forefront is like the idea of it being revolutionary really adds this lens of it's got to be only on that forefront of fighting against the resistance, but not something scalable through time. Because if you look at, you can't have permanent revolution in all places where otherwise you'd never won, right? You can't win. So what does it leave behind is this forming of community after they've done their bit, right? You've got a stronger community that's they've helped somebody out perhaps, or they've affected some people's lives and they've gotten some stronger bonds, and that's what you leave behind when you engage with this. And then as you move forward, that hardcore punk, that revolutionary spirit can continue fighting against the darkness, right? But in the end, it's not going to be the thing that stays back. And that's an interesting way of looking at like this knife's edge that is necessary to cut through the darkness if you're going to win, which is what keeps the hope alive.
Right. Yeah, and I was just thinking about this driving over the idea of that. Yeah, like what if the counterculture wins and all of a sudden it's the mainstream culture, and then the counterculture is the opposite, right? But that's not really the point. The point is to build that community, to change things for the better, and in that regard, counterculture can never really die. It's something that we desperately need now, especially, and not to go down a terrible rabbit hole of AI artwork and the homogenization of just art in general, of trying to make all this stuff look the same and and we really need artists to step up and to cause a counterculture, which is why in Transmedia,
Mhm.
Storyworld, talking about these things. This is one of the messages that's coming across, and that's what's really, really interesting. And once again, how I love those little epiphanies of, you're talking to somebody about your project, and they go like, well, you need to find something that, that's going to be uniquely a signature on this. And Nick goes, oh, right, hardcore. That's a big piece of who I am. That should be a part of this. And it fits so well, right? So you guys, you and Bo, Nick, were saying, or were a part of this scene, and the primary setting for the world at the moment, right? We'll get into the larger pieces of the world in a second, but it's in 1990s, right? Mid 90s. It's a great framing device for people that lived through the 90s, alongside the hardcore scene of that, decade. Why the nine? Well, we kind of know why the 90s, but like specifically the 90s hardcore scene and why that was so important to have as like the a launching point of a story world that has history going back to prehistory.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, spoiler alert, I was about 6 or 7 years old in the mid 90s. The 90s hardcore scene, admittedly, was not the scene that I grew up in.
Okay.
I grew up in the early 2000s scene, which was much more uh, mixed with like kind of the emo movement and a
Sure.
whole bunch of like I guess commercialized elements sort of bleeding into hardcore. It was still an amazing time and a time where I really felt a part of a community and a family. But in terms of the 90s, and Bo might be able to speak on this as well because I know he's uh, fairly well informed with the sort of history of hardcore in certain areas. Um, but it was just such an interesting time for the scene. You had kind of this moment where hardcore came into its own, where you had these kinds of different movements around ethics and values occurring. Things like veganism grew in popularity in the hardcore scene in the 90s. Straight edge, which is like no drugs, no alcohol, kind of living a clean life. That was another popular thing. You had weirdly the Krishna belief system starting to show up in some of the bands, which is quite strange considering, I guess, what the traditional perspective towards religion is for hardcore and for punk. Um, but yeah, like just you have this environment where all these different ideas are coming up and being shared at shows and almost like preached on street corner sort of vibe, right? And then as we move into the sort of later 90s, you start to see unfortunately some sort of militant versions of some of these ideas coming into play and kind of conflict between subcultures within the subculture, if that makes sense. So it's just a really interesting, fascinating time for the scene, with lots of like cool conflict and lots of cool different ideas at play. So it felt like a really interesting period to explore for the story.
Sure.
Was there anything you wanted to add to that, Bo?
Maybe just like provide some more context on hardcore in general, because as Nick said earlier, it's started as an offshoot of like the punk movement of the 70s. So the first real hardcore bands were sort of early 80s American suburban kids who were just bored as hell. So by the time you get to the 90s, and some of those bands are like awesome, the 80s bands are great, but by the time you get to the 90s, you've got, a decade of this genre existing. So it starts to branch off into various subgenres. The sound is more similar to what you hear from hardcore musicians now as well. So it really set the tone, and um, the ethics is a real big part of that in the 90s. Nick touched on like the lot of like vegan and straight edge bands like Earth Crisis, who are still like a massive influence today. So like the hardcore that we know today is really more influenced super heavily by the 90s as opposed to the 80s hardcore. So that's why like 90s is such a great time to be looking at hardcore for our story.
Also,
so
the
interesting.
90s, if I had to look at a societal kind of lens, like that late 90s is where we had like a tech boom, right? That
Sure.
resulted in the dot-com bubble. And you end up with this kind of global reach where the world suddenly started looking at like, oh shoot, you've got these big corporates that are now maybe more important than countries, or any
Mm,
borders that existed beforehand, and a lot of access that came along with that. And and then here you've got a counterculture like the straight edge one, which I was tangential to, right, as well, which was very much anti a lot of that consumerism that was really rampant in the late 90s. It carrying forward from the 80s as well, but in a new form that was more
sure.
global. And so, yeah, this idea of this overarching, crushing, unassailable darkness is something that we can resist against.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good segue into kind of the, and I've already mentioned this, the propaganda versus an authoritarianism that's seeping into Ghostward. Well, not seeping in; it's pretty stoked, both by rain and by authoritarianism. Um, and how hardcore fits once again so perfectly into that. Like this is a logical place for that resistance and it coming into its own, as you were saying in the '90s. Yeah, it's a very good merging of interesting mediums, especially something that you're not, at least I'm not familiar with, hearing about or seeing about when it comes to the, as we transition into the bigger world of the occult and all of the supernatural stuff that's going on within Ghostward, what's going on within the Farbodies story world. So why don't we dive in a little bit there? We're not going to go too deep into this because it, once again, 121 pages and probably still growing, um, of history and lore and all this stuff. But really, let's talk about these three stages of consciousness where our protagonists right now in the novella are able to travel to, and that there are these existential threats that are coming, and that Earth is just but a little pinpoint in this much broader, not even just the seeable universe. We're talking about like three times that um, in size. So what are we looking at? What are we dealing with when it comes to the entire story world and kind of the movements and cogs that are influencing the stories that are going on in Ghostward? Ghostward.
Just before I jump into that, I just wanted to add a comment to what we were just discussing previously.
Sure.
I think something that we kind of danced around but didn't really touch on properly was this idea of authoritarianism and fascism at play in the story world, right? And it's important for us in the time that we live in, that we create a world that not only entertains but like kind of gives people ideas and knowledge on how to deal with and live with the rise of global fascism that we are unfortunately seeing at the moment. And the hardcore scene traditionally has always rallied against fascism and against authoritarianism, right? So another reason why we sort of are leaning on that culture there.
Yeah.
But yeah, just in general, I just wanted to note that like there are these themes at play. They may be masked as supernatural elements, but that's sort of these are the things that we are getting at with the monsters and the weirdness in our world is how do you deal with and live within a system that is openly hostile to you, right?
Right.
Um, and so I guess that does lead into the next section of our discussion, right, around these different I guess, cosmological aspects of the world. So obviously we have Ghostward, which is our central setting. Ghostward is somewhere on Earth. I won't specify necessarily.
We got a
And
Simpsons.
Earth, our world is within our dimension or our realm or plane of existence, right? So that is one sort of uh, larger playing field that we're working with. Um, Now, outside of that, we have what we call the astral plane. The astral plane is kind of this metaphysical reality that our dimension exists on as kind of like a point on a map, but so do many other dimensions and worlds and things like that. The astral plane is kind of this swirling, chaotic storm of archetypes and ideas and imaginings and everything. It's very Jungian, if you know your story focused psychology or philosophy well.
Sure.
And the astral plane is kind of the where everything comes out from, right? So our dimension comes out of the astral plane. But the astral plane is also dangerous. It is home to horrifying entities and strange, ruinous worlds and all sorts of things, right? And then the third sort of area that we have that we're playing with is what we call the psychosphere.
Hmm.
And the psychosphere is kind of this in between between our dimension and the astral plane, kind of like a barrier zone, if you will, right? Like
Sure.
this sort of in between. And the psychosphere for our characters and our world sort of appears as this sort of shadowy, almost mirror version of the physical world. But it is this sort of space where our characters are able to project their consciousnesses into, or their far bodies, if you will, and sort of travel through that space and interact with it in certain ways. Um, and it is also a space that tends to trap within it strong emotions that have occurred in the physical world, right? So,
Hmm.
say you have like, some horrific accident or explosion or something like that happen in the real world, then the emotions caused by that event might become trapped in the psychosphere. And when this occurs, this is what can create things like curses or evil spirits in our world. So yeah, that's the big three, I guess.
Hmm.
Sure. Yeah, so it's an interesting kind of way. Like I'm picturing it like almost like how if you were to like magnify like the eye, there's like these different like layers to it that are all there, right? It's not like they're not there, but the all of the terrifying things that are happening within Ghostward is coming from things and from a place of most of the people that are walking around don't know about, right? And the authoritarianism that you're referring to is this battle between cults that are trying to control that for their own power, right? And trying to some of them are trying to bring people over, some of them are trying to figure out how to or like research them, figure out what this is, right? What are these monsters that are coming over? And so there is a lot of what you would imagine the White House secret president's book full of stuff that you're like, the public doesn't know, but there is this secret war that's going on, or all these different secret conflict that's going on that is causing so much. Like the world is teeter-tottering on the end, and yet everybody's still walking around like everything's fine. And there's only a select few that are actually trained to prevent it from kind of going down that pathway.
Something that's been effective for me thinking about all of this, particularly as you talk about the secret war, is
Yeah.
how we can, because there's a metaphor here of like just look at a cell, right? Used an eye as an example, but we're
Mm.
using a cell where the psychosphere serves as like a membrane, right? As Nick mentioned, around the reality, in the same way that a
Yeah.
cell membrane protects the inside goodies to maintain some sort of homeostasis. And so you look at just the everyday life and society, people are happy as kind of that everyday homeostasis bit. And they're unaware of the outside of the cell membrane, astral plane. They're unaware of the struggle that's happening at that border. The psychosphere is this emotional kind of reactive zone, is like the hardcore punk scene in a way. It's the reactive layer that helps resist the outside. It's not
Gotcha.
spatially oriented, right? So this idea of a war
Right.
being anywhere, it's happening through the psychosphere, so that it's happening underneath and we don't notice it. It's because it's not spatial. It's not like a country's border where you're being invaded from the outside.
Yeah.
It's more of
Yeah.
it's this like emotional traumatic kind of boundary where hardcore punk acts like that membrane, and the psychosphere is the membrane, and ooh, it's weakening, and we're going to be, we need some sort of resistance against this oppressive other. Yeah, and so it's the inoculation, the membrane is the hardcore punk.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you guys sort of bring up this idea of the hidden war, or the layers of hidden worlds, and uh, that is maybe what I've come to learn through this process is my favorite kind of story to tell. I grew up with, like the shows like Supernatural, right, where every new season you were kind of like digging deeper and uncovering a new layer of this kind of hidden world that surrounded the characters, right? Like initially they're just monster hunters on the road, and then next thing they're dealing with not aliens, angels, and then after that, it's like God's sister, and this kind of like delving
Yeah.
deeper and
Right.
deeper,
Right.
deeper into these hidden worlds, and for Farbodies, we've been very influenced by perhaps the ultimate story of hidden worlds, which is the ancient Gnostic mythology. Um,
Mm.
I don't know how much people know about this, if at all, but the Gnostics were essentially a offshoot of early Christianity, and they had some very interesting and controversial beliefs, namely that the God of this universe was not all loving or benevolent or omnipotent, but was actually a blind idiot God. And in some cases, an evil, malevolent God, dependent on the different variations of the stories, right? And they basically believed that this creator God that created the physical world was a corrupted entity called the demiurge, and the demiurge was sort of semi-divine, somewhat connected to a real divine realm, but ignorant of it, and had created our universe and called itself God as a result.
Mm.
And so the Gnostics believed that the purpose of life was to kind of awaken to this truth, and awaken to like kind of the spark of hope, the spirit inside you, right? So that you could one day sort of ascend through these different realms almost, to return to your home, outside of the physical material universe. Um, and so we haven't followed that to a T by any stretch of the imagination, but those ideas are very prevalent in Farbodies, particularly
Yeah.
because we're talking about astral projection, right? The idea of consciousness and projecting your consciousness into other realms of existence. And so, yeah, that has become a major influence, and this idea of layers within layers and hidden worlds
Right.
within hidden worlds is very key to what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's fascinating. It's a really, it gives you so much, so many stories to tell about it as well, to really kind of fully explore and understand what's going on, right? It's endless, and a lot to discover and a lot to pique curiosity. I want to talk about the factions that are in the that are the most prevalent within Ghostward, specifically what we're dealing with within the novella. So we can kind of get this idea of like this: who's trying to control what and what's actually happening in those secret underground underneath a laundromat with the neon signs hidden places, right? Like what's happening there, and what are these factions trying to get out? And I think that'll lead perfectly into the novella, which there's a launch party coming up soon. So yeah, so what factions are we primarily dealing with, and what do they want? What are they trying to do?
Yeah. So we sort of mentioned this idea that Ghostward is just stacked with different occult factions and conspiracy groups, right? But perhaps, well, definitely the most important, or one of the most important for the story, but perhaps one of the most important just in world, right? If you get what I mean, is this faction known as the Estinati. The Estinati are a ancient secret society that originate from sort of the Mediterranean, Italian sort of region. Their name, I believe, literally means those who have been put outside. So they are kind of this group of outsiders, right? Their sort of original purpose is to protect humanity from these kinds of incursions and threats that come from the psychosphere and the astral plane. Um, but sort of over the years, they've been around for I think roughly 2,000 years if my memory serves me correctly. Um, but over that time, they have grown to become fat and complacent and bureaucratic. And so when we kick off with the novella and the start of our story, the Estinati are these kind of almost X-Files, FBI sort of faction that investigates the supernatural and makes sure that it's kept under wraps. Kind of like the Men in Black, I guess. Um, but because of their complacency, it has made them uh, ripe for targeting and for attack.
Mm.
Sure.
And we'll delve into that, I guess, a bit more when we start to get into the novella itself. But they are definitely a key faction. Um, on the opposite side of the spectrum is the Altiorum. The Altiorum is a cult of sort of ceremonial magicians, so they're very ritualistic, um, but also they are sort of interpreted through a lens of, I guess, neoliberalism and corporatism, right? So have these, they have this big conglomerate as a front, and they dress in nice suits and sort of operate like businessmen.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, they are sacrificing humans to dark gods and things like that at the same time. The Altiorum are kind of the arch nemesis of the Estinati, though at the time that the novella begins, they've kind of pulled back from that war and instead focused their attention on sort of taking kind of like an Illuminati role of, sort of sitting high up in the penthouses of their corporate towers and ruling the world through finances and things like that.
Hmm.
So that there are some two massive factions that have a lot of history to them. Um,
Yeah.
our core faction though uh, are the Farbody punks, and these guys are a relatively new faction. In fact, they don't actually form officially until the projected end of our novella series. So
Sure.
several books in the future. But they are our core cast of characters, right? They are the local hardcore scene that have been awakened to what is going on in the world, and have discovered this ability to be able to project their far bodies out of themselves, and they use this ability as a way to fight back, as a way to interact with the supernatural, and look for a solution to this kind of broken system that they are living in. And part of that is through interacting with the local community. And it was important that for us that they weren't kind of this chosen one savior group that comes along and
Sure.
fixes everything for other people. Rather, they are a group that is more interested in equipping their neighbors and their community with the tools to be able to stand on their own. Um, does that mean that they never have to come to the rescue? No, but their ultimate goal is to kind of create a situation where everyone can kind of be their own saviors, right? Um, so there are kind of three core
Mm.
factions. Outside of that, we've got a lot of sort of what we call mystery antagonists.
Mm.
So the one of the primary antagonists in the novella series is a supernaturally empowered serial killer. We also have kind of a more chaotic, militant group at play that is sort of causing problems for both the Estinati and the Altiorum, and they are ruled by a
Mm.
mysterious figure who will become very, very important in the story world
Mm.
as we go forward.
Sure.
But yeah, other than that, monsters, ghosts, spirits, all of that sort of stuff as well.
Yeah.
Let me tell you something. There's a lot of monsters. There's and
A lot
they
of
all are using environmental pieces of Ghostward to survive, and it's very very interesting. It's very fascinating. Sorry, Rich, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, I was just gonna say, Nick, if I could add a little nuance to what you were talking about in terms of something that's really been interesting to me about where we can dip into this IP, is that on the face of things, it's quite easy to kind of group up like Esternati are this, Altium are this, there's the baddies, there's the goodies, we're the Farbody punks. But there's a lot more nuance as you dig into it because, of course, there's a plurality of kind of views within any of these kind of factions. And that plurality is something that can come out a lot in gameplay and allows us a lot of space for any of the kind of interactions we've got to show us like, well, there's a reason that people might choose to consolidate power because they think they're doing something better for humanity. So you might find Altioran people, for instance, who are like, well, I need all of this juice so that I can like benefit humanity in the way that I see fit because I know best, right? Like that kind of like mentality. Yeah, and seeing making relatable characters that as players can take on some of those roles, whatever kind of game that they may be playing, they can be sympathetic to them as well. And so it's important to add that nuance from my perspective, saying, well, if we want players playing some of these characters,
Right.
they need to be sympathetic in some way. And it is in fact it's like, why would someone choose to be a Nazi? Like why is that there, right? And
right.
Yeah.
It's got to be. I love, and that's something that's very prevalent in the collective journey model, which we're all disciples of, or apostles, pardon me, of Jeff Gomez, and that in his work in the collective journey, the idea that there are like people don't just act out of evil. You know, somebody is sitting there going like, "I'm doing this to be evil."
Yeah.
You know, the whole mustache twirl, which I do when people think I'm evil.
Yeah.
But there's a core philosophy or core principle in Stoicism philosophy that states that no man does wrong knowingly, right? And it's like, I'm doing it because of this end. I think I'm helping, right? This is how I can help. And that plays perfectly, Richard, into that kind of concept of like, why would somebody join another one of these factions? It's like, oh, or why, like, I have to be able to relate to all these characters. It's not just point the finger and be like, that's the scarecrow,
and,
that's a bad guy.
Right, and everything that every moment that happens, any conflict that happens has a rippling effect. Like, to some person, whatever happened, it could be a bad thing. Oh my goodness, that one guy gets killed, he gets a job promotion. It was a good thing for him, but yet then you have this guy who got killed, and then you have the family that is like, well, hey, this guy got, it's like, so it's like one thing can spiral into 20 different things that could happen to other people. And it's kind of like, is the moment that happened like good, bad, or is it kind of almost indifferent? And it's how we're all reacting and how we can build around it.
Sure.
I think that's it's always a cool way to, like, you look through history and there's one way people have been prescribing it or one way of looking at it. And then all of a sudden you can say, well, this happened and then this happened. So it's like negatives, sure, positives, maybe, but it's all kind of,
They tried to do what was right in the moment, or what
right.
they thought was right in the moment.
Right. Or not even try to do what's right in the moment. They just try to do something, and a lot of things happen. And it's like, how do people react? And you have to realize that there's going to be every single emotion that happened around something. It's going to happen. Someone's going to look at a flower one way and be like, rebirth of spring. That's my grandma's favorite flower. She just died. You know what I mean? So you're looking at one thing, and a bunch of different people are reacting to it in a much different way.
If you take if you've ever taken a class on like creative writing or any sort of like storytelling class or lecture or anything, right? Like, we like to say a lot that like everyone sees themselves as like the hero of their own story, right? And so that's how you should write characters, and that's like 100% true. But I will add that what I've definitely discovered working on this project, I guess because it is a horror-based project, is that there is a darker sort of other side to the coin of that, right? Which is the sort of mundanity of evil, right? Like, yes, everyone thinks they're the hero of their story, but also like evil does occur, like horrifying genocides and all of these nasty things do occur, but they never, like you said, it's never someone twirling the mustache and going, haha, I'm gonna wipe out this whole group of people. It's tiny little steps that get them to that point, right? And mundane steps, they're steps that are like decisions about numbers on a sheet or whatever, right? Like, and so no one thinks that they're going to be the next Hitler.
Yeah.
They all
Or
think that the hero.
yeah, and importantly, if they are, it's righteous fury, right? Like
Yeah,
that, and that kind of
right.
righteous fury is where evil comes from as well. Like you've got these mundane acts as Nick talking about, and then like, well, they deserve it, right? The other,
Right.
and so there's lots of othering here, and so diving into this world where we've got a literal other, right? We can kind of make concrete that metaphor quite well through the kind of monsters you're fighting.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, we are running out of time fast, and we have not gotten into nearly as much as I wanted to get into. But we have to absolutely talk about this novella. So, first off, and I'm realizing I don't have the title to the novella in my head or in my notes. So, what's the name of the novella? What's the first iteration here?
Yeah. The first novella is called Urban Folkcore, which is a play on folklore and hardcore. And it's the first in a series that was actually originally written as a series of comic book scripts, but we decided to convert them into these sort of like zine length little novellas instead. The series sort of tells the story of how the Farbody punk faction is formed, and sort of follows some key characters in the hardcore scene as they sort of brush shoulders with this hidden world, and sort of discover the true nature of reality, right? It kind of begins with an attack that devastates the Estonati faction, and pretty much wipes it to extinction. So the one protective group that humanity had is now gone, and just through associations, our characters in the hardcore scene start to discover what's been going on under their noses, and take action to take action to like sort of defeat these different elements of darkness that are starting to invade their own lives and social circles.
Yeah. Yeah, the DeLuca siblings are these main protagonists throughout. There is just so much cool stuff within the outrage being a hardcore band that they're associated with, and that whole under element, and you really start to see, and it's really beautifully written with the to illustrate this, like this is what the scene is. And when you start to discover that, once again, the Estronati are, oh man, like it's bad, and they're kind of thrust into these positions where it's like, well, if we don't do anything, who's going to do something, right? And seeing that forming of the Farbody punks, right? We already said that's what they're coming together, right? The band's coming together, but the interplay between these characters, and there's, once again, it's a beautiful launch point into the world, and I can't wait to get to the next novella, which should be coming out. I know that you're almost rough draft, past rough draft for the second one.
Yeah, well, the first draft of the second book is now completed.
First draft of the second book.
It is now sitting somewhere, so I can forget about it for a couple of weeks and then come back.
Of course.
Start the editing process.
So so Urban Folkcore is going to be available very soon. You guys are having, and it's unfortunate that we can't come, because obviously we would come dressed like this and stand out in the hardcore scene. And also it's in New Zealand, and we're not going to be able to make it.
We definitely look like explorers.
Yeah, right. I'm really disappointed actually that we can't go, or that it's not somewhere closer, because this is something that I do want to experience, and I'm sure we'll make that happen at some point. So tell us about the event, where people can go to purchase or pre-order the novella. And yeah, once again, I'm so looking forward to these photos and videos and seeing how this thing goes. Which I know that all of a sudden the scene itself was like, oh, by the way, Nick, we got people. They're coming. We're gonna get photos. We're gonna do videos and stuff. We're like, oh, great. I didn't even.
Yeah. So we the novella. I think the launch day is the 14th of next month. And then we're doing a release party sort of thing on the 18th, so that Friday. And the way that we are doing this sort of release party, it's a little untraditional, I guess, for a book release. But we're putting on a hardcore show for the local scene here. So we've got a few like great bands lined up for it. It's going to function mainly just as a show, because we want that to be the thing. It's important for us that we are building community, right, around the IP, but also that we are plugging into an established community that we respect and love. So like we had previously interviewed a bunch of people from the local scene, and just in general about like how they felt the scene was going, and what they loved, what they disliked, all these sorts of things. And something that came up a lot was that there was a concern around a lack of all age shows for particularly for like the younger sort of high school age kids as well.
Sure.
And then sort of lack of venues too. So we thought, well, what better way to like sort of introduce the project to the scene that inspired it, then
Right.
to address that and put on a show, and an all age show no less, so that we can kind of bring people in and like I said, build this community. So yeah, that's coming up next month. Hopefully we sell a few copies of the book, and
Right.
we've got some t-shirts as well, which will be available online shortly after. So if you guys want to pick one up, they'll be there.
Absolutely right. And all the links to all these things will be in the description of whatever, if you're watching this on YouTube or listening to it on your favorite podcasting platform, for you guys to interact with it. Little teasers of the things that we were going to talk about was the trading card game and the tabletop RPG and all these things that, you know, Bo and Rich have been working on. But it is
We've
when
been
I saw
working on a video game as well, like a little
in the
indie
video game, right?
video game that these two. have
There's
been
going to be a
very-
lot of cool stuff, and you know what and Nick already does this, but whenever there's something that's going on with Farbodies, like it's going to be promoted on all of our stuff, so that people know what's going on. And there's some really cool sandbox specific areas of the story world for people to really make up, like, what, I don't know what happened, and really interact with it. It is one of those things, a quintessential transmedia story world created by people that understand transmedia, that is going to be a world that you are going to be able to live in and get lost in, as a fan. And that's all really we can ask for. And if you like hardcore, well, there you go. And if you're curious about it, you're going to get into it. And I'm looking forward to it. I mean, the Outrage being its own entity, as we know, and then once again, brilliant marketing concept of just putting on a hardcore show to be like, hey, we heard what you're saying. We're one of you, right? Let's start kicking some butts and get that counterculture back up and roaring. I'm so glad that you guys were on, and I'm looking forward to more conversations. And yeah, looking forward to keep it going, and looking forward.
We have to do a part 2.
We have to do a part.
Well, you know, it's almost as if now it's like every single thing needs its own, like, you know.
Well, we need to start scheduling them out for right, or schedule them out for 2 hours. Before I know it, we're going to be bald, smoking cigars with like a bad brick bass background. Yeah. That's a Joe Rogan podcast joke for you.
I don't
where
know
those podcasts
just 3 hours with that.
Yeah. Right. Well,
just go on for like 4 or 5.5 hours. We'll do some shrooms and smelling salts, and
we need to have a air conditioned room.
Air conditioned too. Yeah, we're getting hot.
It is.
All right.
Sorry to ruin the illusion of the teapot. I kept having to fill it up with a water bottle.
This is actually a teapot kind of scenario.
Yeah.
We're on the bows of the ship. Thanks so much, guys. Really looking forward to seeing more.
Yeah, no worries.
Thanks for adventuring with us, intrepid explorers. If you want more great story worlds, well, look no further than our YouTube page.
Yeah, so if you're listening to this on the podcast, they're there as well. But we have some great story worlds, individual artists and groups of people that are developing these great worlds for you to explore. Take a browse through our collection, and I'm sure you'll find something that'll pique your interest. Also, make sure that you buy the novella. It's out on July 14th. If it's past July 14th, then it's available, and the link is in the description.
Still available.
It's still, it's definitely still available.
It's not a one-day sale.
Yeah. Thanks for hanging with us.